And the kind of language I hear in my interviews with people is, I used to feel like I was broken. I'm not. Like, simple, I'm not broken.
Innate health is not the only thing that matters. Resilience matters, some social support can matter, but it keeps popping up as the strongest predictor, and in some cases can fully explain positive patterns.
We are at the place the mindfulness community was 60 years ago.
The way you speak about that almost sounds like a magic pill. It sounds like we require you to change your fundamental beliefs about reality for you to have this shift.
In criminology, self-control is considered the gold standard for what needs to change. This understanding has a huge impact on self-control. What they discovered is that when you came out of the program, things improved. Things are going well. 6 months later, things improved even more.
Right.
That's impressive.
It was a remarkable pattern that didn't exist in the general population. We are piloting research and the results are incredible.
What are the best results? Dr. Jeanne Catherine-Gray, Dr. Anita McGinty, welcome to Beyond Skepticism.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here.
Thank you for having us.
So nice to have you. So you are both the COO and CEO of Innate Health Research.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit of what you're up to?
Yeah. You want me to go?
You want to jump in and start? I mean,
You start. Because it began with you before that.
So Innate Health Research is interested in how we can resolve the global mental health crisis. And we think there are innovative ways where traditional psychological programs aren't looking that can make a big difference in the outcomes of our psychological lives.
Yeah. So we formed as an organization on the heels of work Jeanne Catherine had been doing. We wanted to formalize it. We wanted to mobilize, in an organized way, and which is why we formed the nonprofit Innate Health Research. And I think our driving question was, let's shine a light on things that are working out there in the field that aren't known by systems, academics, places that could really take it to a tipping point of scaling and growth. And how do we begin that? By mobilizing research, mobilizing our approach to bringing in the people who do the work as part of the research process. Both things are really important in our movement, and it's been exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you can think about us as a research organization that are asking some pretty important questions. How do we find sustainable programming that makes a big impact on mental health and well-being? How do we work with program partners who don't normally get attention or have funding? How do we incorporate into research some equity and inclusivity so that voices that are doing some really innovative, fascinating, exciting things that might create solutions,
Mm-hmm.
right, get to be heard? How do we do that in the research process? So that's an important part of the work we've been doing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it really started off because we were both personally impacted by programming that was outside the norm, that normally you would consider sort of non-evidence-based. And in some ways you could say that's a privilege, right? To be able to try different ways of thinking about the world is a privilege. And what we have done in research, because we have very specific ideas about how to get information and who holds knowledge, is we've limited where we've looked. And that's a problem that we need to resolve by thinking about how we do research and designing strategies that are both thoughtful and scientific
Mm-hmm.
and respectful and inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
So, Jeanne, you talked about mental health crisis, and Anita, you talked about a movement. Now, was looking into your stuff, and it seems like you are doing a lot of projects based on the three principles understanding, which viewers of mine probably know, since every single guest we had so far was coming from the three principle understanding. How did you get to this understanding, in the way that how did you chose to make this the focus of your projects, of your research?
I think, like most great scientists and researchers, we found our way, and we'll share our different stories through personal experience. So for me, I was a mental health patient. I went to a lot of different kinds of therapy, and a lot of people who are involved in the Three Principles movement do have that experience of being a seeker. Like, what's happening for me? Why is it happening for me? What could be different about what's happening for me? And when you're curious about the world like that, you try a lot of different things. And it's a kind of science. I mean, it's not the kind of science we would peer review, but it's a little tiny personal research project, right? Okay, this is how I feel now. I did this, I did that, I did this. This is how I feel now. What's next? What's next? And so that journey for me took me to a lot of different places. And the thing that was most impactful and effective was realizing something very simple about how thought works in the human condition. It's not that complicated. And even early psychologists like William James talked about the only thing we have to know is the fact of thought. But when I read that, it doesn't tell me anything about how I make meaning, or about how I suffer, or how I get over suffering, or how I feel better, right? Something about the simplicity of teaching the three principles allowed me to drop kind of the noise and all of my own struggling and suffering, and see something about my human condition that was fundamentally true and shared. And that was so impactful for me, for somebody who had been struggling for so long and suffering from mental, what would be considered complex PTSD at the time, those kinds of symptoms of panic attacks and anxiety and nightmares and, waking up screaming at night, right? I mean, that's the kind of life I was experiencing. And it was what I was looking to escape, essentially. And so for me, the realization that I did not have to live with my abuser, that I could live free of that person who was no longer in my life, and that happened through understanding how the psychological system works, so that I could work on my behalf, essentially. I could be my own best ally. That was a real game changer for me. And I felt at that point that all women who had experienced violent abuse should have this opportunity. So the thing that I learned, the thing that I took from it, was that there is this potential that women who have experienced have had violent experiences and trauma in their lives did not have to continue to live with their abusers. And I had not learned that before. And I had done a lot of really important things. Recently, I've been taking care of a family member with mental illness, and her mental illness, in some ways, is much more complex. But the thing that I've noticed most with the wonderful people we've been working with, like wonderful people doing fabulous jobs, is that all of them are managing her response to her thinking.
What do you mean by that?
So what happens for us as human beings is we have a very powerful meaning-making system. And it moves very quickly from sensation, from taste, from sound, from smell, from visual, into reactivity. I mean, that's how we're designed to work. We're supposed to work that way. That's not wrong. But when we make meaning that the thing we're experiencing is horrific, then we scream and cry and yell and react in ways that we find ourselves difficult to live in. And so for example, somebody with intrusive thoughts where they see imagery that they feel they can't control. It just arises, and it's very upsetting. Then the wonderful psychologist or nurse psychiatrist is going to help you cope with your reaction and try to minimize the intrusive thoughts, because your reaction is so dangerous, right? You might want to hurt yourself. You might want to, your reaction could be the end of you. And so everyone who's being loving and supportive is saying, okay, what kind of medication can we give you? What are these things that we can do? What's the list? But they're all managing reactivity. None of them are saying, in fact, I think I'm the only one who said to the person in my family, this thing that's happening to you, it can't hurt you. It can't. You can absolutely be scared. You can absolutely be frightened. You can absolutely have your response, of course. And it's the response you're so upset about.
So I wonder, working with a scientific method with those kinds of approaches to human mental health, how is that working out? What are the responses of colleagues? Do you have a lot of criticism? Do you have support?
Oh, I'm really glad that you brought this up. One of the biggest things we heard when we went in and said we want to research the Three Principles community and what they're doing and what the impact is. At the very beginning, 8 years ago, everyone said to me, it's not possible. You can't do it because the Three Principles is a spiritual understanding, and you can't measure something spiritual. And that didn't make sense to me at all. I mean, the founder of the Three Principles, Sydney Banks, said that something existed within all of us that gave us access to creativity and wisdom and some knowledge. And if that's true, if something exists in all of us, we all have some kind of source, then there's got to be a way to find ways to measure that. I mean, it's just got to be a way. It doesn't make sense to me that there's not a way.
Right.
And so that was
is it measuring that, or is it measuring the impact, the results of that?
Well, so the measure is what is the thing that creates impact, right? And ideally the measure is pointing to something that's fundamental, that holds up no matter who you're studying, no matter what program you're studying, if you think that program is supposed to touch whatever the mechanism is, right? So this 3P program, that 3P program, maybe someone believes that you touch innate health by walking in the woods, which actually was in programs I've experienced, that's a piece of the program, right? Is to go and let your mind be quiet. And so what is actually changing? It's not what the person's saying. It's not that I have a checklist of things to learn and now I've learned them. It's something inside, and it has an impact on downstream behaviors, mindsets, experiences. That's what we went out to measure.
Well, and I think it's a really good point. Let's back up for a minute, because a lot of people would say, who outside of the Three Principles community, that the reason people are having good outcomes is because there's a nice feeling, there's a good connection, you have an ally. Well, so some of our questions are, is that true? Is it the teachings, or is it the nice person? You have to distinguish those things in research. And so we had to identify, what is the thing that we're going to try to measure? What do we think that thing is? And that's where you come into, when we say measure, is really questions, right? These are questions. Measurements in psychology are questions.
Yeah.
They're questions about your resilience. They're questions about your well-being. They're questions about your anxiety and depression. And it's your perception. That's what we're hearing from people we ask questions to. There's no other way to do psychological research without some kind of observation, description from the person experiencing
Because
it.
how would you measure experience, right?
Right.
So then it's important to design questions that get at what is the mechanism that's making the difference. If we can show that it's not the relationship per se, but there's something else also going on, what are the questions we're going to ask? And so some of the questions that we developed over a period of time were based on The Missing Link by Sydney Banks. And this is an important distinction because it's not that other researchers hadn't tried that before, but they based their questions on things they had learned from the three principles. So they thought, like, this insight is a good question to ask. I'm going to see if other people have had this insight.
Can you give an example of that?
Like seeing the power of thought at work in your life. So if you're always asking people about the power of thought, that may not translate to a population who's never heard of that term, the power of thought.
Right.
Or if you're asking people about mind or consciousness with that terminology, which is the Sid Banks terminology, people outside of the three principles may not recognize that. So we were thinking about, okay, how do we ask about this and kind of get away from the teachings of three principles, but still have the meaning of these three concepts? How do we do this so that somebody who wasn't three principles could answer the same question?
Right. And I know you developed something that's called the Innate Health Scale. Is that what you're talking about? Is that the result of that?
That was a result of that research, was developing something where we could ask about that. And then we have to see, does that work? And so we tried it across a lot of different people in the three principles community. And then we tried it in a normal population. You want to say something about that?
Yeah, well, I will, but I
up.
want to go back to the question you said, how is it going in general? And some of what Jeanne's talking about, what our team does so well is use really rigorous standards for the things we develop with really creative approaches to how we're going to build the science. So we are committed to scientific principles of one thing at a time, and each thing builds and it's intentional, right? First, how do we measure something that stays the same in a group of people that have been measured before? It can be noisy. You're talking about people's opinions. Today I feel this way, tomorrow I feel that way. But if you can do it and it performs the same way, you've got it. Then how do we expand who that is? Then how do we see if it can show change? Can it show change in people? Then you ask, so the questions build. So that is science, and we are very rigorous about those standards. Where we're creative is we are invested. We both were touched by this. We use an external person who does our statistics, and we keep that firewall so the numbers don't come from us. But it is a movement to me. This is something we are trying to use science to open doors for something we think is really impactful and powerful for the population. And so that's a very different use of science than just the pursuit of science for itself. Our questions are always aimed at how can we make this impactful? What are the barriers we're going to reach in the academic community, among colleagues, and then let's use rigorous methods. But we have a goal to use science to open doors for this. So,
right.
And I would argue all science has goals. So, I don't think you can get away from the human factor.
I think
even
that's
though
true.
Science likes to sell itself as this objective, but we are really upfront about it.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the impact both of you had. Jeanne, you shared about it. It seems so understandable for me to have a bias, wanting it to work.
Yeah.
So, Anita, you just talked about you using an external person for statistics.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you make sure that you committed to the scientific method and to neutrality?
I mean, so Adrian, who is our statistician on our team, the main one, he will say overtly he has not drunk the Kool-Aid, and he doesn't do any of the work of messaging, right? So if we think about we put some things on LinkedIn, I just wrote something on challenging our assumptions. It has a point of view. That's not a scientific publication, but we mix the kinds of things we talk about. he doesn't go there. He takes the models, he takes the numbers, the data are collected, he cleans the data, he decides what's worthwhile and not. And sometimes that results in throwing out data that look like that person just said yes, 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 yes. So he will take out things that look like
Right.
bias. He will run those numbers. We get into conversations about, well, could you model it this way or model it that way? And that's great. But he runs it, and it's his reputation as an independent statistical consultant to, have it. And it has been very, very positive. But it's not always not a surprise. There's not things that don't surprise us, or there's not things that wow, it really impacted anxiety and depression, but a little less on well-being than we thought in this study, or in general, the patterns are incredibly stable, which is
very consistent.
mind-blowing, really. And even he will say he'll run them and run them again. But that firewall and that acceptance of the results, never do you change the result. You might ask the question, can we model it this way to look at this angle or that angle? But we write everything up. We accept all the results. We disclose all the results. We're open science we would be open to
Sharing our
data. So the commitment to that is
And there's another thing that protects us, and it's curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
When you're curious about the world, then you don't have all the answers. You're like,
Right.
well, I think this is what's happening,
Yeah.
but is it?
Yeah.
I want to know. I don't want some built up answer that I already put together. I want to know what's really happening. Is it happening?
Yeah.
Right? And that's what makes us scientists.
Yeah.
We're interested in the answers.
Yeah.
And there's stuff in this data that surprises me all the time.
Yeah.
I had no idea that it was such an effective program. I didn't know. I knew it was effective for me.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's effective for everybody.
Yeah.
And I taught the principles for a number of years before I got involved in research. And sometimes people really walk away like, no, it's not for me. And I wanted to know why.
Right.
Like, why is this so effective for some people? For other people, they're like, you're just trying to sell me some garbage. Well, what's the difference?
So my question would be, why is it so seemingly so effective for some people and not for others? What is your answer based on your research?
I think you should answer this.
I mean, innate health, fundamentally is the thing that's happening. That's what it looks like in the research. That innate health is a measurable thing. That the 3 principles as a program is substantially increasing innate health, substantially, and innate health changes your anxiety, your depression, well-being.
What do you
Go
mean
ahead.
by one second? What do you mean by innate health?
So for me, we're measuring this capacity and awareness for creativity, wisdom, for seeing the psychological system at work.
Right.
And we use other measurements too, but that's how I think of our measurement. I think we have a lot more measurement work to do. We are not near done. We are just at the beginning in lots of ways.
Yeah. So your question about why it works and doesn't, I didn't really share my story as much of how I was, but I had traditional psychology background, was working in academia as a psychologist, saw a friend who had been learning the principles, who was utterly changed. I didn't have significant mental health trauma, at least at the time. I wouldn't have thought that. But I was this worried well to the point where and it didn't make sense. My life was quite beautiful, and it didn't make sense, the degree of just tightness that I lived with every day. And the principles for me, that was the first time that someone talked about me creating my own experience, but not in a way that was blaming or shaming it somehow, and not to fix. It was a sort of descriptive experience, but I resisted it for a decade. I mean, I would learn it and I would seek it, and then I would put it over in a little corner in my life, and I would go about my life as a psychologist working by old paradigms. And then I would go over here and, learn it and feel a little, but so I think, to Jeanne's point, we are not pushing for any particular way of teaching it. Three principles is an incredibly effective way of teaching it. It appears in our data. Are there other ways of teaching it? It's possible.
And what is it?
The innate health concept, which I think is a set of I don't know if it's a set of beliefs or awareness. We are actually struggling with that term. I am. I don't know if everyone, but our measure thinks about when you have the experience of learning about how it's an inside-out job of your experience, what beliefs end up coming from that, what awareness comes with that, and that's what I would say we're measuring. The words I have for it may be different than what the words Jeanne has. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think in psychology, we talk about belief because that's what we're measuring. You can't really step out of it.
Yeah.
We're sharing our beliefs with you.
Yeah.
We can't stop doing that. It doesn't mean that some of my beliefs aren't more true.
Right.
So, there's, and so we are interested in, for me, I'd say, how our awareness of this innate health capacity, which is a philosophical idea that people believe or don't believe, but how does the awareness of that then change people? And it looks like it does. It changes people. And people who are, this is something that I didn't know for sure when we went into this. But we've had the opportunity to ask men in prison learning this, and we've had the opportunity to ask unemployed women with children who are with serious mental health issues, schizophrenia and bipolar, and these are small questions. These are small groups. I mean, it's not like the thousands of people, but we've had the opportunity to speak with people who are getting addiction treatment through the three principles, pre-post, and when you have those kinds of opportunities over and over again, even though it's a small population, the consistency of the answers is striking. That doesn't usually happen. Usually when there's an intervention, they do something really well in one particular area, but it doesn't cross over different kinds of issues particularly well. But it looks like, at least so far in our pilot work, it does.
Yeah.
And there's something happening where people feel empowered. They have some kind of insight about their own capacity for well-being, for their own capacity for knowledge, their own capacity for creativity. And they start saying, like, hang on a second, I don't have to date the guy who beats me up. Or I don't have to not speak to my parents. I can have a relationship with them. Or I'm not afraid to go get a job now. I'm going to go put myself out there and go to 30 interviews. That's a change that is impactful in their lives. Not because anyone gave them something, but because they saw for themselves, I'm going to try to take advantage of what is out there. I'm going to try to build something new. I think I can do that for myself. And that's important because they can't take advantage of the opportunities if they can't even see them.
So you're saying those seem to be the result of people, well, you could say realizing their innate capacity. Another way of saying that, maybe more neutrally, is starting to believe in an inner capacity. Those are the results that
and
you
the
are
kind
noticing.
of language I hear in my interviews with people or in our interview research is, I used to feel like I was broken. I'm not. Like, simple, I'm not broken.
Right.
So think about that, navigating life not broken. If you think you're broken, what do you do differently every day?
Right.
And then if everybody around you treats you like you're broken, how do you respond to that? So that what they're doing in the three principles work is they're saying explicitly you're not broken.
Right.
And they're saying explicitly, we want to show you how this psychological function works. We're going to give you lots of examples, lots of experiences and stories, and then you figure out for yourself what that means to you. And what's happening in those conversations across these different kinds of programs with different kinds of facilitators is that at least some portion of this population is being deeply impacted in a way that they feel empowered to take care of their mental health.
Now, the way you speak about that almost sounds like a magic pill, like something that feels almost like too good to be true. I wonder, I don't know if that's the right word, like counterindication. Is there other people you notice that it doesn't help or it may even hurt, or the language of, in those programs, teachers or psychologists telling people that they're not broken. Well, if that would be truth in the sense of if that would be on universal, well, that may be a great message, but be good to know, right? If it's true. Is it true for every person though? And if not, isn't that dangerous? And yes, isn't this more of a philosophical problem or issue?
I don't think we can measure that.
No, but I want to point to two pieces of information from our research, I think, that get to that. I think that is the really important distinction between what is being taught in a program and what is the mechanism. So what we found in our data that is people, we measured the general population, and then we measured the 3P community at large, sort of through networks of people sending out the survey. So not some people knew a lot about 3 principles, some people knew a little, all had some exposure. In that population, innate health, their perception of their own innate health, their awareness and belief in it varied. It's not that everyone who's engaged in the community who are learning things had the same level of innate health. It's not sort of an on or off switch. It's a variation in the degree to which you hold, a series of beliefs, or the strength of those beliefs, or the consistency of those beliefs. Consistently, the more of those beliefs you have, the better your outcomes are across the board. That was true in the general population. That was true in the 3P community. That's been true in every single study of interventions that we've seen. But there's still variation. So does it work for everyone? I think the distinction is, does going to a program work for everyone? No, because some people walk away, or like me, I went to programs for 10 years, but my learning curve was really slow. The degree to which I was in touch with my innate health, each increment helped me, but I was not an on or off switch. I was not one of those who was sort of hit from above, because I had a lot of resistance in thinking.
Right.
And, probably still do sometimes. And
are there people that seem not to get impacted by the principles, and not as singular people, but as like patterns of people that you notice?
So we haven't seen a group.
No, we have not seen that. And it's a lot. There's a lot of research to be done. And this is one of the things about research. It's expensive. It takes time. It is detail orientated.
Right.
And so the thing we would like to look at, what I can share is we looked at a waitlisted control group, right, in prison. These men all received the same kind of programming on the same wing. They were there for the same kinds of reasons. There's nothing different about these two groups. But one group went through a 3-day 3 principles program called Insight to Wellbeing. And that program, that 3 days, changed so many things about those men. Even in the interviews. I didn't do the interviews. And the person sent me these questions they had done. And they sent me the interviews, and, it's all written up in transcripts. I read through them, and I made 2 piles, and I was 100% right. The reason they were different is because the group that did not receive the 3-day intervention shared nothing about their lives. So the interviewer would ask, like, how are you doing? Has anything changed? What's going on for you? And they would say a few things like, oh, my weight's changed, right? All external things. Right. In the intervention group, they had pages. Let me tell you about what I learned. Let me tell you about my life. Let me tell you about what I've done and how I see myself differently. They were sharing their inner world. So something is fundamentally different about those two groups, and not because of anything else.
Right.
Now, there's a lot more research like that needs to be done. There's, this gold standard of research is our RCT, a research controlled trial.
Randomized controlled trial.
Randomized controlled trial. And so some of that is going on in education, and we're involved in a program like that. And it's a very expensive proposition. You're talking about multiple states, multiple classrooms, thousands of kids. That's not a small project.
Right.
And then you'd have to do that with multiple populations. Right.
Yeah. And still, I guess I wonder about this. like the three principles understanding is around for 50 years, a little bit more, I think. I'm not sure, maybe a little bit less.
Yeah.
Now for me, like if I imagine it being that transformative, that impactful, I wonder about the current state of research. And in a way we could say, okay, like that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to enrich it. And still, like I'm aware of like maybe a handful of studies which are beyond like just a handful of people in it. And those studies show good indications and good results. But it was half a century. I just wonder, why isn't there more? Why isn't there at least one of those studies, or 2 or 5 or 10? Why isn't it spreading faster? And maybe it's a general question. Do you agree with that? What is your take on the current state of three principles research?
I mean, my first response is, do you really think 50 years is that long? Like, I'm like, really? Like our lives? I don't know. Seems like there's movements that have taken shape, right, that took much longer.
Right.
So I'm not sure that 50 years is that long.
Yeah.
But in the world of research, like 50 years is not that long.
Right.
Well, and it's money, right?
Yeah.
So money, I think the mindfulness community, and I don't know the numbers, so I'm not going to spout them, but there was a point where that community invested significantly in research on mindfulness because they understood that that is what systems need to adopt. So while the three principles practice is amazing and worldwide and has spread, it is spread in ad hoc ways, in pockets and fits and communities, in networks. Amazing reach for what I would call a grassroots movement, because it is not adopted by the systems that someone who can't pay for that weekend or isn't happen to be in the prison that happens to be open to a pilot, systems that dole out the mental health care in countries, systems like school systems, nationwide, statewide, that adopt programs for students. All of those will not adopt things without research, a significant amount of research. We are piloting research and the results are incredible, but it has to spark more, and as a community, I think because it's lived with such power in the moment, in the experience, in the networks, the research has been really ad hoc. I mean, it's been not systematic. I think we are doing some really systematic things. And there's been some great research, this study or that study, but it's not a line of sort of how do you take research as a tool and, again, move this idea to a tipping point.
Right.
I do think the measure, and I shared this, I know when we talked, but I'll share, in my early childhood career, I was an early childhood academic for 20 years, as well as in the field. And one of my colleagues, they created a measure on what is quality in early childhood, and similar sort of 7 scales but it was powerful because it spoke to something no one was looking at, and it kept performing and it's now in sort of policy across our country in many spaces. It changed the entire field because some people could look at it and see it and understand it. The measure, which sounds so technical, was a lens for a new world that they didn't understand. And so people who weren't even that interested, they were interested in what you could measure. They were interested in saying like, oh, you mean quality in this way can be measured and it matters? Oh, and there's a program to improve it? Those are the 3 pillars. We have the pillars. We just haven't mobilized them in the 3P community, in my opinion. There's programs, there's now measurement, there's an interest in research, but we have to hit systems,
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe a question from the other side of And I see your point regarding that 50 years may not be that long.
But Anita's point is better because what the mindfulness community did, we are at the place the mindfulness community was 60 years ago.
Right.
We are just privately funded to start running pilots. That's what mindfulness did 60 years ago.
Right.
It wasn't until those pilots started being published in peer review research that other researchers at universities became interested and started running research. It has to spread, and we need funding to do it.
Right.
That's the only way it will happen.
Yeah. So let's turn the question around from why isn't there
Mhm.
happening more to
Mhm.
what are the best results? Like, what are the best studies, the best results out of those studies? If you had like a couple minutes in front of investors,
Yeah.
what would you talk about?
Well, fundamentally, in the criminology field, there's been enough pilot work now that we can say for sure we should be running a much larger study,
Right.
because what we're seeing is significant changes in things that really matter. It's things like anxiety and depression, sure, that happens across all the populations. But in criminology, self-control is considered the gold standard for what needs to change.
Right.
And this understanding has a huge impact. An innate health understanding has a huge impact on self-control.
Can you talk a little bit about the study results? Because
So
that was the
there are
study.
there are a couple different studies, in fact, that I'm referencing.
Right.
One was done by Ty Dingle at Pacifica University, where they looked at an Insight to Wellbeing program in Portland in a facility on the West Coast,
Mhm.
and it was women, so that was good because we did men, so that was good.
Mhm.
And they looked at things like psychological inflexibility. They looked at anxiety and depression and well-being, and they looked at trauma symptoms. And they looked long-term. And in research, long-term can be as little as 6 months.
Mhm.
So they looked at when they went into the program, they asked them a bunch of questions. When they came out of the program, they asked them the same questions. 6 months later, they asked them the same questions. And what they discovered is that when you came out of the program, things improved
Mm.
really well. Things are going well. 6 months later, things improved even more.
Right.
That's impressive.
Mhm.
And especially when you're talking about trauma symptoms being significantly reduced, well-being going up, anxiety and depression going down. What they introduced was this idea that psychological flexibility, I'm going to call it because that makes more sense to me. They measured inflexibility, but it's sort of the same side of the same coin. But psychological flexibility has a relationship to your mental health and well-being. So they're looking at that. What's this relationship? And what they discovered is this Insight to Wellbeing program that's based on 3 principles has a transdiagnostic potential.
Mhm.
It could cross over diagnosis in the DSM-5. So they introduced that idea. And then we came out with our work, which was out of Nottingham Prison in the UK, which was looking at men. And our interviews were several months after they received the intervention. And what we found after a 3-day program, so their program was 10 weeks. What we found after a 3-day program was increase in self-control, decrease in anxiety, increase in prosocial behaviors. It's
Right.
very important
Right.
in these kinds of environments that people are building friendships,
Right.
that they're proactively stepping away from aggression. Aggression goes down. And what's important in these studies is that it's been consistent. So even some of the earlier research in prisons with this type of programming, not necessarily the Insight to Wellbeing program, but based on the 3 principles work, they're seeing the same kinds of changes. And then that's happening over time. We also looked at a group that had gone through addiction and were in a recovery program that was 3 principles for 8 weeks. Now, of course, drug use went down because they were in a recovery program. They were housed there.
Yeah.
But the other things that happened were things like they had an improved alliance with their practitioner, like treatment alliance. So that's a very positive thing. The kinds of things we expect to see now, because we've seen these different research projects like anxiety going down, depression going down, those kinds of things happened. What was interesting and something that we've tested to speak to the question of like bias is we do like to test for social desirability. That's a very common way for people to bias research, especially if the facilitator is involved in any way with the research data collection, which in our case, we've been lucky. We've been able to have enough funding to have the program teachers not ask the research questions, right? That's
Yeah.
ideal. But there's a way to measure and ask questions to see if somebody's answering the way they think that they want to answer.
Right.
Now in the prison study, we found it wasn't social desirability. That wasn't doing it. So the good outcomes are because innate health went up. I mean, that's and self-control went up. That's why. But in the addiction stuff, there was some social bias. These addicts care about what you think, and that came through in the study. And so there's more research to be done. right? It's partially obscuring the data. Is this something we need to look at more deeply?
Right.
Go ahead.
So I don't think there's one study to me, and Jeanne is much more in the specific intervention studies for the prison, which are incredibly impressive. But if I step back to like the 30,000 foot view, I think what's impressive is it keeps working the same way. We have gotten a standard model largely where whether you're in prison or whether you're part of the drug rehab or whether you're in this financial, support program and have dealt with financial instability, we're measuring the same things: how much stress, how much, anxiety, how much rumination, how much depression, how much innate health helps, how much your social structures help. And we keep finding that innate health is not the only thing that matters. Resilience matters. Some social support can matter, but it keeps popping up as the strongest predictor. And in some cases can fully explain positive patterns, so sort of the higher innate health, the lower your stress, the lower your rumination, the better your anxiety, the better your depression. And it keeps showing up that way, just on its own. And then it keeps showing up that 3 principles, when it's taught, increases innate health, which then improves anxiety or depression or rumination or improves well-being, improves resilience. And so it just keeps working the same way, which is the most impressive result.
And there was this really interesting result that we're probably not totally ready to talk about yet because we have to look at this data a little longer.
Yes.
But Adrian pointed out that people who received the 3 principles but didn't have a change in innate health, so they didn't get an understanding or an insight, they didn't believe in innate health, they actually did worse hanging out in the 3 principles community. I thought that was fascinating.
Yes.
That's one thing. I mean, that's fascinating because it says that it may not just be hanging out with a nice guy, right?
That's right.
That's why it's
not
so
just being in the
interesting.
community.
Yeah. So that's one thing that is fascinating. It is really about understanding.
What you have, the insights you have.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that was fascinating, in psychology, stress and rumination go together always. These do not separate, ever.
Right.
We have some data where rumination and stress separate. That means that when somebody's answering a question, they're like, oh, I am stressed, but I'm not ruminating. The rumination has gone down. It's negative. The stress is up. Usually those trend together. Stress and rumination go up.
Right.
Stress and rumination go down together. They don't go in different directions. And Anita's going to say that way better than I just did.
No.
Go ahead. Say it way better.
No, but just in the community that had been exposed to 3 principles, there was a small group, which we need to see more of, that essentially they're not stuck in thought, no matter how much external stress they're experiencing, and they had decent levels of innate health. So we saw that pattern, and we want to see it maybe more. But
it needs more research, no question.
But it was a remarkable pattern that didn't exist in the general population.
You would never usually see that. It's just not something we would even talk about in psychology. It doesn't occur to us that that's possible.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. And also when you talked about the long-term effects being so strong, that's kind of like a big invitation to do more that kind of research. But then you also talked about, I don't know what you said, like
transdiagnostic.
Transdiagnostic.
Oh, yeah.
It reminded me of this, and maybe it has nothing to do with it, so please correct me, of this general factor P in psychology. Now, I wonder, does it? Because there was one paper on it that I recently read. And I see you have kind of
it's Tom Kelly. Tom Kelly, Jack Pransky, Bill Pettit. Sometimes Judith Sedgman was on that paper. She's written some good things. I would say we can't comment on the P factor. It's not part of our research. I've read the paper.
Yeah. I will say our colleague Nikki puts it this way, and I like this, which is so the P factor has a lot of nuance that is really important, and I think that's what we can't comment on. But what I think is parallel to the way we've talked about it, and Nikki, our colleague, is the one I think who often talks about it being upstream. It's so the goal the goal is upstream. So much in psychology is downstream. It's a particular disorder with particular behaviors, and we're going to work on, minimizing some of those behaviors to give you a better experience. And I personally am not against, I think there's immediate relief or immediate help that can come from that kind of thing. But I think transformative, changing your baseline mental health in a transformative way, that's not white knuckling it through, a breathing exercise or a talking myself down, which again can have its role. It's touching something upstream, which is the perception, right? If you build an awareness of how the system works, and then that awareness begins to shift your perceptions or beliefs in a way that is self-fulfilling. You're constantly looking now for different data in your daily experience. You're looking for data on your innate health. Then you shift up here, which then you don't need to work on the behavior because the behavior was relying on the schema you have for the world. You behave
Right.
in ways that, so I do think the concept of something fundamental or upstream from behavior is something we think about and talk about. We haven't measured that we've measured it, but I can't say we've taken that theory and done all the parts of it, that it would take, but
It's relevant to transformative education
it is.
thinking.
Yeah.
That the idea is talking about the behavioral problem is like talking about the pollution downstream of the plant, right? What's causing the pollution. And so this idea that there is almost what might be called like a mindset or a belief or a way of thinking that could allow you sort of new access. And I think of that mechanism as insight. And I'm not talking about the way psychology usually thinks about insight, because psychology has a very limited view of insight. They simply look at and this is like psychiatric psychology, but you basically looking at does somebody who has schizophrenia have an insight into that they have schizophrenia? Well, that's not that interesting to me. I'm really interested in what kinds of insights do people have that shift their well-being and their mental health. So they might have schizophrenia, but the insight that makes them experience life better, right? With less stress and less anxiety, that's interesting to me. And I'm not convinced it's always the same insight. In psychology, we've kind of gotten onto this idea that if you have an insight into that you have this personality disorder or this thing, then you will get better. I'm not convinced that's necessarily true. Our insights might be quite unique. The insight that is the mechanism by which we see and look for that innate health data.
Last question regarding specifics and measurement and research before we move on to innate health and what it really is and digging a little bit more there, would be this. It's hard for me to kind of grasp how would you ensure comparability between different studies when a 3P facilitator or a 3P coach or a 3P teacher isn't really a term that is regulated or controlled. So what does a comparative result mean if it's not clear what we even compare?
That's a great question.
We talk about this.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the first answer, the way we've dealt with that so far, is the people who have grown programming and written manuals, and they're pretty reliable. They're making a living. They're working with people. People are talking about them. They're training other people, and so we have the opportunity to start there. And so when I first started 8 years ago, I was actually also given some money to give away for research. And I would have people call me all the time from the 3 Principles community and say they wanted to research their practice. And I say, well, how many people do you work with? And they say 1 or 2 a month. Well, I can't research that. I need a bigger numbers, right? So I think the grassroots issues is where we sort of answered that dilemma at the beginning. And absolutely that has to change for us to be able to scale up.
Yeah. So I'll say it the main research impact studies does this, if you learn this, do things improve? we have focused on, I'll call them manualized programs. That's a psychology term, but they are written. There's lessons, there's a
Right.
12-week plan. It's very transparent, so we can compare. And across the programs we've looked at, they're fairly comparable. There's comparable in timeline and the key things they do in the 10 to 12 weeks. We've also done a 3-day intervention, but it's very, what was happening. The quality of the teachers, is high because they're very experienced, but did we measure that? No. That is, we do have, and we'll talk about it, the concept of with someone who sees 20 people a year, how do we study that? We can't study that with the same rigor, but we have created a project where we're asking and hoping more and more people will put their data essentially as a collective voice into the real world data project. So it's one step down from maybe the most rigorous science but we are working on ways to have people follow some certain protocols and enter their data and have some technology tools that could support them. So they could. So you only have 20 people, but if there's 600 of you around the world and we can have your data come in every so often, we can combine that and have a collective voice. And the way we would account for differences is we wouldn't, but we would have that noise. So if this practitioner is really good and this coach is really fabulous and this one is actually not really doing anything and doesn't get it, if they all put their data in, we will see the range and we'll see the noise in the data. And while we can't control for it, we can see it, which is huge.
I'm searching just because we have to. We have to close it up soon. I will may cut you off sometimes. I apologize in advance.
Yeah.
I wonder, in an understanding where it seems to me like grounding is a big word. So there seems to be this innate health, and there's a degree to which I see that, and to the degree, and this means to the width and depth and any other dimension, I see that in my life. I have this grounding and I can have an impact on people. Now, Jeanne, you just said we don't have it yet, and with it, we talked about certifications or qualifications for comparability. How would we ever be able to, even conceptually, to measure something like this, which is like not intellectually knowledge based, which you could do a test, but which is grounding based?
I don't think it's that different than any other program myself. I think sometimes when you teach the principles, you get confused about that languaging is irrelevant to scaling up a standardized coaching group. In essence, it's like we have research tools that can show us if somebody is an effective whatever.
Right.
Whether you're an effective psychologist or you're effective three principles person or you're effective dog walker, right? It doesn't matter what you're doing. We can measure whether the people you're working with learn that. And I just don't understand why it's complicated.
But you can't do this for every single new practitioner or coach. So you right now, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you measure people doing this for a long time, for a short time, but mostly with lots of people, so you have enough data to measure. Now, if this is supposed to grow, it wouldn't be only about those people and their skills in teaching or facilitating. It would be about them teaching teachers, which then...
So this is the next project we want to do that you can help fund.
For real.
For real. We think... Our hypothesis is that if people were working in the community, they had a very large volunteer program.
Right.
For example, it could be maybe they're working with kids. If we bring in the Insight to Wellbeing program, let's say, and their very experienced teachers come in and they teach this to the staff, to the teacher, to the mom, whatever it is. What is the impact on their lives? What is the impact on their children's lives? That's a nested study. It's expensive.
Right.
And none of this, what Anita talked about earlier about, it's building blocks, Right? We're building building blocks. And if this is going to be a real solution, it has to be something that's shareable. It has to be. Otherwise, it's not a real solution for us in the global mental health crisis.
Right.
And so I would argue it is shareable. I would argue that you don't have to be a 3P professional per se, that you could learn it as a mom or as a teacher, and that it would imbue what you're doing in such a way that it would improve the outcomes for you and my hypothesis is for the people you work with and serve.
Right.
Now you might be able to say that in a better way.
No, I think that's right on. I think being able to study, and I think it's important what Jeanne just brought up, and actually it's just occurring to me, but part of it is it all explicit teaching or is it implicit teaching, which is what she was talking about. Like, one way to have it grow is teach all the teachers in the building and see if there's impacts on kids, even without the kids being directly taught, or give it to all the guards in a prison and see what it does to the men or women in that prison. That is not because they are gotten to a point where they're teaching the principles to the prisoners. It's because they've had something in their grounding or presence has changed enough that it changes the culture, the environment, and enough to improve things. It's not going to improve, I wouldn't think, in the same way as if everyone, including people in prison, got the training as well as the guards. That would be amazing, but I think that from a scientific standpoint, it that creates a way to really try to understand how can this grow? When does it get so diffuse that we're not really having an impact? And maybe from that, it becomes easier to understand credentialing or something else. But I think before you could even go down that road, we need to understand what just learning does.
I want to share a specific story that shows how this works. A man in one of the interviews at Nottingham Prison said there was a guard who kept sort of beating on them, like being disrespectful, being rude, really giving them a hard time. And he said, after taking this program, I realized that could change. So every day I go and I talk him up. He'd be rude and mean, and then I go again, talk him up. He'd say, hi, how are you? How's your family? Be really friendly. He just kept putting himself to it. And guess what happened? The guard stopped being mean to them. Now, that's a tiny, tiny thing, you would think. But imagine the culture of living in a prison and having one person who controls your life always treating you in a terrible way, a disrespectful way, right? That little change could be a shift on the whole floor. Just because this one inmate decided to be nice to the guard and talk him up and decide not to give up. That's key, right? He went back again and again and again. Right? So does everybody need grounding? Did that prisoner have grounding? I don't know. But he certainly changed something for himself and for the men on that floor.
I see that. And the point I'm coming from is this. Anita, I think you said a couple of times now that there's a degree of innate health. And I don't know if it's just a language thing, but the way I understood those 3 principles is that the degree that people have innate health is always the same. It's always kind of unlimited. It's always... And this is what I got, is that we are health. Like, so it has something even spiritual about it.
Yeah.
Now, one of those differences in terms also of the qualification question is, usually qualification is kind of there to like ensure a minimum, right? So like not worse than this. So we can be confident to put a certification and vouch for that person. Now in the 3P, I always had like the sense of, it's not about what's the minimum, it's about what's the potential. How far can we go? And it sounds like to teach people that is different than seeing it in my own life. And this is kind of what you may have touched on, that people have insights in their own life and then trying to share that specific insight, and that didn't work. So grounding, as I understood it, and again, correct me if you see it differently, is to understand something beyond the specific form of personal insight, to be able to share it to all kinds of people. So
I think that's such an incredibly important question that I'm glad you
Hmm.
asked. So I just want to clarify a few things because it's really important, some of the things you said. So when I said innate health varies, I'm talking about our measure specifically.
right,
And I'm talking about not the potential in every person or what we are, but maybe our awareness or degree of belief in it, or because our perception, because our measure is only the perception of a set of innate health ideas, my own innate health and how that functions in the world. That's what our measure touches. It has nothing to do with the sort of human spiritual essence of why this exists, of what Sid was teaching, of what people have drawn to. So there's a huge distinction between sort of what we can measure and the whole thing. Research is always reductive to an extent. It's
Right.
always reductive. And so, but it can nail certain things down.
Mhm.
So it's reductive, but it nails certain things down. And the trade-off, you just got to try to get it right,
Right.
and so it is in no way suggesting that it's not unlimited for every person. It is how aware people are, and the awareness or perception matters.
We're not here to teach the three principles.
Right.
And we want to be really clear about that.
Right.
And we want our partners to know that. We are here to find ways to measure what's going on. We're here to build a scientific base and to create an opportunity for scaling up. We can't do that alone. We can't do that without funding. And it is absolutely possible. And we have to test that.
Right.
That's my belief, right? I believe it's possible. That's my hypothesis, essentially. And we have to test that. There are lots of ways to create certification and other kinds of university programming that is both qualitatively rigorous and quantitatively rigorous.
Right.
So why not for the three principles? And I could be wrong. That's the beauty of curiosity.
Right. Right. So here might be a challenge.
Yeah.
Every person I had on my show yet spoke, as far as I could hear it, of something deeper than what they knew before. Right? They found something. It was spiritual. It was a breakthrough. It was a letting go of identity, and there was something else which is hard to put in words. And maybe not all of them, but I think certainly most of them spoke about that they found something fundamental about not only human experience, but kind of reality, but at least human experience, like consciousness and this innate capacity that most people talk about as being unlimited. Now, in a modern, you spoke a little bit about philosophy, like in a modern philosophical, like metaphysics, most people are either like dualist and say they're mental stuff and physical stuff, and a lot of people, like certainly more and more over the years, are materialists and say if you break everything down, then we can reduce it to particles. Now, all of what I heard sounds more like a idealist or a neutral monist way, in the sense that maybe everything physical is basically just mental, or even saying, okay, there is physical and mental, but both are not fundamental, and what's fundamental is this Advaita Vedanta-ish pure presence, pure witness, consciousness, and everything appears in it. Now, maybe I'm off in that kind of feeling that I had talking with my guests and with other people, but that would mean for me in a scientific discourse with the three principles and their effect, that there seems to be something different than with studying an effect of, a new approach or a new therapeutic form, because it kind of for it to have an effect, it seems like a deep effect. It seems to have a different worldview, like a different understanding of the nature of reality in a sense. And that sounds for me like even like a little bit much to ask from people. And at the same time, it seemingly works super well, but it sounds like something that it's hard to require. It's like it sounds like, we require you to change your fundamental beliefs about reality for you to have this shift. And maybe it's needed, but I'm curious about what you see in that like philosophic sense, if you have any response to that.
I was quite interested in the transformative power of insight as a mechanism in this whole conversation. So some people in the 3 Principles program don't take 12 or 15 years. They have an insight that happens in a moment that's very powerful and fundamentally changes the fabric by which they experience the world. And at least 8 of those people I interviewed, and they were able to describe in detail what happened to them at that moment.
Right.
And fundamentally, they stopped thinking a way they used to think, and they started thinking a new way, which is what you're describing. And when they started thinking this new way, their experience of the world changed.
Right.
Now, I don't think that's required for someone to be always looking at and growing, because the thing about the word grounding is it is not a permanent state.
Right.
It is a almost, dare I say, practice to challenge oneself to see the principles at work over and over and over again. Because if it's true that we are experiencing mind, consciousness, and thought creating our reality at every moment, then what's also true is we don't know that.
What do you mean by that?
If we are designed to experience reality one way, then how would we always know that's what was going on?
So
we never step out of that box.
All right. So are you saying that? And it's funny because if you are, we had a discussion, Aaron and me, during the last episode. If we say everything, like if we say the fundamental substance of experience is thought, and that's true, then that would be kind of a circular statement, because the only way we would know that that's true, if it's true, is that. I kind of got confused. I confused myself. So let's try it one more time. Hi, future Michael here. Since I didn't quite get it right in the conversation, here's what I was actually trying to say. If you claim that the fundamental substance of experience is thought, then there's kind of a circularity with that. Because if all we ever experience is thought, then the claim all is thought would itself just be thought. And the problem with that is that there's no way to step outside of the system to check if this original claim is actually true or not. Luckily, Jeanne got the gist of what I was trying to say, so with that, back to her.
I mean, this is fundamentally the consciousness problem.
Right.
This is the problem in consciousness research. We are experiencing it while we are talking about it.
Right.
And it is the thing we're swimming in. And we can't see the water, right?
Right.
It is a fundamental issue, which is one of the reasons why, as a scientist, I don't try to tackle that. I look at what can we measure? We can measure perception. What can we measure? We can measure experience. We can ask people, right? We can measure large groups of people. I don't think it's measurable. Now, there are some braver scientists than I.
Right.
And it does seem like there are some methods that can get at this better than other methods.
Right.
Well, I'm not really playing in those methods very much, because I'm interested in the mental health issue.
Right.
I want to see practical things on the ground.
Right.
I mean, I've learned from some of the people on your podcast. It's a constant unfolding, and they've been unfolding for 25 or 30 or 40 years, and it's incredible. It's incredible to see the potential of what this can offer at the highest levels. I'm attracted to it not because of that, to be honest. I'm attracted to it because I think it offers something, even if that's not where your mind is, even if you're resistant, even if it only takes some of it away, even if, I think it's this self-fulfilling cascading process. So even if you take just a glimmer of it and you start to look in your own life for it, it will change things. So I don't know, and we haven't scientifically studied what it's like what are impacts with those kinds of, I would love that study. What are impacts with essentially the people who are just unquestionably holding this presence and have had an unfolding for 30 years versus a new group of people who've come through a training, through a program, who've got experiences, who can speak to some of this, who want to share in schools or in communities. What's the difference? Imagine there's some differences, but maybe there's still a lot of really great impacts,
Right.
yeah. And that's what's interesting to me.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many different things to study there, including when someone teaches the principles, they all teach a little differently. And so is the outcomes the same? Does somebody have an insight into mind and somebody else has insight into consciousness? I mean, I'm just curious about that.
One more question about philosophy. So every metaphysics seems to have its problems, right? Like, you have the interaction problem, the hot problem of consciousness. You have all those kinds of the combination problem. But there are philosophy endeavors who look for answers. Now, the three principles in its psychological reality or its community doesn't seem, in my observation, have to have a lot of interest in philosophy at all. So the philosophy of mind, like underpinning, you could say, like, of what do we mean by whole and mind and realization. Well, like what are those terms referring to? They seem to be all over the place for people who are really curious what all of that means. Now, I know you're not philosophers, but you're doing psychology, and I wonder if that is a problem for you. And why do you think people in the community aren't super interested in philosophy?
You brought up something I wanted to say earlier, which is that when we use the word thought in this conversation, we're using it very differently than thought is used in psychology. And so it's very confusing when we're doing interdisciplinary research to use thought in a totally different way. So what you're talking about is a part of research. How do we define what we're talking about? Are we all using the same language? And we have to have those conversations in order to refine the research, in order to improve how we look.
I'm wondering if I'm going to be like kicked out if I say what I'm
No,
saying,
go for it.
Now you made us all curious.
I think that, we are very interested in translating. I think one of the things we're doing is taking this research and figuring out how to get it into the criminology journal, how to get it into the positive psychology journal, and so we have to work with those terms and as a result realize to some extent not everything in the three principles is brand new. It exists in spiritual traditions, it exists in wisdom traditions, it exists in philosophy. And because when we have to do the lit reviews, we have to sort of build that. And I don't find that a problem, because one of the things I loved when I first learned was, like, don't listen to my words. He didn't want us to listen to his words. He didn't want us to listen to his words. I don't think it's an expedient, simple, clear way to point someone at something, the three principles. That is what's interesting. Like, it doesn't matter if it's brand new or not. It doesn't matter if it's the only three things that matter or not. it does point to something in a way that is so simple that I haven't heard in other philosophical traditions. And that is what potentially lets it be effective. And that is exciting because that can change the world. Because too much depth it's going to lose people.
Right.
And I think it has the potential not to lose people, and it has the potential to let it keep unfolding into these depths that you describe with. But I just love the idea that it's just simple and it can be done, and it could be done for lots of people at different levels. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well said. Well said.
Thank you. Is there anything you'd love to say?
I just thank God Anita was here.
Oh. I would say the same. I was like,
yeah. Well, I was going to say ideally in not so many minutes, but
yeah.
Well, that is cool. Anything else? And it might be a no. This is perfect. That you'd like to say that's still missing? Or are we good?
I mean, maybe it's already been implicit in everything we've said.
Right.
We have great plans. We have a great strategy. We have an incredible team. Fund our research. Help us make this movement happen.
Right.
So we can answer some of these questions and we can get more people on board.
Yeah. Well, since we already got it started, maybe a shout out to your website.
innatehealthresearch.org. Although the best way to stay in touch with us is to follow us on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
That's where we're sharing data and new information all the time.
Yeah. I'm just grateful that we're here. Yeah. So thank you for having
thank
us.
you.
Yeah.
You're so welcome, and thank you as well. It was a real pleasure.
Yeah.
I thought about having this kind of conversation for a long time. Really happy to have found you and that you agreed to come.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, you might also enjoy my conversation with Dr. Dicken Bettinger titled Foundations of Psychological Experience. You can watch it by clicking here. If you want to support my channel and get early access to episodes with minimal or no ads, please join my Substack by clicking here.